Welcome to The Blueprint, Canada's Conservative podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Schmale, Member of Parliament for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes Brock, broadcasting live from my constituency office in Lindsay, Ontario. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got a great show lined up for you. As always, don't forget, please like, subscribe, share, comment, help us push back against the ever-moving Liberal agenda. And, of course, you can tell your friends about us, too, because we are available not only visually, but also through audio on platforms like CastBox, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, you name it. We're trying to get out that conservative message and, like I said, push back against the ever-moving Liberal agenda. Coming up in the second half of the show, we have Member of Parliament Peter Kent from Thornhill. He's going to talk about China and the World Health Organization and how all of this is coming together as we battle COVID-19. But first, we have John Williamson, our second East Coaster here live on The Blueprint. He's the Member of Parliament for New Brunswick Southwest. He's also the Shadow Minister for Labour. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. Great to be with you and all our watchers and listeners.
And I feel bad. You have a tie on, I don't, so you up me.
You've got a very impressive, though, backgrounder there. I like that. So you're looking good.
If you knew how it was assembled, you wouldn't be so impressed. There's a lot.
It works.
So we're here to talk about some of the programs that have been unveiled by the federal government, whether it be the wage subsidy, whether it be the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, and we can go on through others. But these programs sometimes, in many cases, takes months or years to implement. These have been done in a couple weeks, but we've noticed how quickly these programs have changed over that same period of time.
That's right. And that's in part because of the speed they're being rolled out. But I also think when it comes to small businesses, entrepreneurs, sole proprietors, the federal Liberal government is a bit unsure how to operate. I don't think they have a mind or an intuition for how small businesses work and some of the challenges that these companies, these businesses, micro businesses face. And so that's one reason why we're seeing so many adjustments as we go. Their emergency response benefit, the $2,000 a month plan, which is welcome, and workers are looking forward to receiving that. In many cases, they have. And businesses, right off the bat, the Conservative caucus recognized that there would be a challenge with this program because it basically incentivized people to either earn some money working or join the ranks of the unemployed. Now, millions of people had no choice, and it was there for them. But there's also hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of small business owners who did have a choice. They saw their revenues collapse, but they were still working extremely hard to try to keep the lights on. And when the response benefit first came out, it required people to have no work, no income, no work. And that left businesses with a choice. They could either keep the lights on, keep working to pay some bills if they could bring in some income, or turn the lights out and receive guaranteed federal assistance to pay some bills. It was a tough call for many companies because entrepreneurs don't give up easily. We pressed a lot of this in the House of Commons, on social media and the news. And a few days ago, fortunately, the government responded saying that businesses or business owners, sole proprietors, people that are now suddenly underemployed, people that had several part-time jobs and now only have a few shifts a week, these people could qualify for the emergency relief benefit and still keep working. And this is what we want to see happening because it's important that we keep the steam, as much steam as possible in the economy. So when we do lift out of this, these businesses are on a track to keep going. Because if we see businesses closing down, some of them just will not open up again, regardless of what happens down the road. We need to prevent that as much as possible.
John, I think you're so right about that. This is why the free market works. This system is so complex that this is why I think your constituency office, mine, Peter Kent's office is receiving these calls from people that are just falling through the cracks, that are so concerned because they are going to have potentially no income coming in the future or right now.
That is right, and that's what I think the government has to realize is that, and we're all realizing just how complicated the economy is. And it shows what we're seeing now with every day a new announcement. And it's a bit like whack-a-mole. We solve a problem, the government solves a problem, and then we discover several others, and we try to deal with those. And look, if it was easy to manage and organize an economy, the socialists would have figured it out 50 years ago. But it's not, and that's why government can only do so much. So temporary relief is important, but we have to recognize at some point we need to reopen the economy. We need to get people back at work. We need to open the small businesses, the backbone of the economy, because if these companies go out, the recovery is going to take longer. It's going to be harder on millions of Canadians. So I'm pleased the Conservative caucus is now pivoting. The focus had been on health issues, and that's still a priority, but we're now having to talk about a plan to reopen the economy, get things moving again, because our way of life was not built on this on a lockdown that's going to go on for months and months and months and months and months.
John, I want to talk to you about reopening the economy, but you said something that kind of tweaked my interest, is the fact that government programs creating an unintended consequence as a result of their implementation. And of course, I'm not saying the government is to do nothing in this circumstance. People have been unemployed or without income through no fault of their own. Businesses are struggling, so the government absolutely has to do something. But even going back to the past before COVID-19, let's back up a little more. The programs that government keep implementing, they in the vast majority of cases always have an unintended consequence. Yeah. And the solution to central planning, as Ronald Reagan always said, is more planning, right? So, yes. The more the plans fail, the more the planners plan. So, yeah. The solution is yet another government program, but you're still not solving the original problem.
No, that's right. And the track we're on now does have to end. There is no way. The federal government doesn't have the resources as well. Every quarter, on a back of the envelope calculation, there's about $400 billion in payroll, and that's more than the federal budget in a year. So we can help out for a little while, and as we should. This is clearly an economic shock. The government has ordered people to self-isolate. It's ordered businesses to close. So I think there's a conservative case to help people in the short term. But I think everyone has to recognize the importance of getting back to an economy that is working, because we're already seeing scarcity in the food stores and in some of the things we're trying to purchase, and we're seeing how the economy we're living under right now is not working. And look, health concerns are important, but those concerns also have to be looked at in light of all the other concerns that are out there: mental health, the stress and the difficulties people face when they have no income and they're not working, violence against individuals, for example, that are compounded again in hard economic times. So we have to recognize there's not one problem out there. There are numerous problems now that this pandemic is causing, and we have to deal with it. And look, one of the ways we're going to deal with it, of course, is by ramping up the testing of COVID-19 on individuals. So businesses, families, companies, governments are able to test people more frequently to find out who has the illness and who does not. So that's part of the solution as well. But there's a lot of things we need to get done here, and that's why we need to keep the pressure on the government to focus on more than just the lockdown.
Yeah, I know, John, you're working very closely with people like Pierre Poilievre, our finance critic, Dan Albus, the Shadow Minister for Employment, Workforce Development, and Disability Inclusion, Raquel Dancho, Diversity, Inclusion, and Youth critic, James Cummings, Small Business and Export Promotion, and many others within the Shadow Cabinet team to start having these conversations in a very respectful and careful manner so that the vulnerable populations, such as our elderly, are protected, our healthcare system remains intact and not overwhelmed, but figuring out ways where we can slowly introduce certain parts of our economy, because another challenge that we're going to have in many parts of the country is that the sun is going to start shining even more. It's going to get warmer. People are going to have a tougher time being told to stay locked down and indoors.
That is true, and that's where governments have to be responsible. In my home province, for example, there have been some tightening that people are starting to question. Individuals, for example, can't go fly fishing, which is something that people really do on their own, or they'll take a son or daughter. ATV trails are closed. I think, look, this is our response has worked because Canadians have bought into it. Mm-hmm. But if governments go too far, there will be, I think, some pushback. That's why we need to be honest with Canadians. We need to be upfront about the challenges and the road to recovery. But we cannot ask Canadians to do things that are unreasonable or that cause too much pressure or pain elsewhere.
And I think it's also important to mention and remind people that the money being spent right now by the federal government in the vast majority of cases, it's printed money. So they're basically creating money out of thin air. And of course, we also have in your neck of the woods, the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, which is basically declared insolvency, and the federal government has had to print money to pay their bills. So this is the dire situation we're in.
That's right. So this is the first time that I'm aware of the Canadian government has had to print money to meet its debt obligations. This is worrisome because it's telling us indirectly that the capital markets might not be willing to purchase all the debt that's out there, because it's not just the 10 provinces and the government of Canada, it's governments around the world that are borrowing. Yet the fact the Bank of Canada is printing money suggests that those markets might be saturated. And of course, as they print money, that could have and will have, I think, inflationary pressures down the road. But it's also money that Canadians will have to pay back. We are on the hook for it. This is going to have an impact down the road on future spending, debt interest charges from the government of Canada, and just our well-being and our quality of life.
John, thank you so much. Any parting words before I let you go? I know you're busy.
No, I appreciate coming on and anytime, and stay safe, and let's keep rolling.
So John Williamson, thank you so much. You're the Member of Parliament for New Brunswick Southwest. You're also the Shadow Minister for... Thank
you.
Welcome back to The Blueprint, Canada's Conservative podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Schmale, Member of Parliament for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock, broadcasting live from my constituency office in Lindsay, Ontario. Don't forget, please subscribe, like, share, comment on this program. Help us push back against the ever-moving Liberal agenda, and especially during these trying times, we need to get out the message about what new programs are available for Canadians and what new information we can help provide that will keep you and your families safe. So just a quick update before we get to Peter Kent. As of right now, April 16th, there are 28,899 confirmed cases of COVID-19, almost half of those confirmed cases in the province of Quebec. So our thoughts go out to anyone in that province dealing with that situation, and right across the country, in fact, as we try to plank the curve, as they say. So joining me is Peter Kent. As mentioned, he's the Member of Parliament for Thornhill. He's also the Shadow Minister for Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship. Thank you so much for joining us here, Peter.
Well, thank you, Jamie, and it's good to be on The Blueprint with you.
As I said during your last appearance, it is a great honor for me to have the Peter Kent on this program. You've had a lot of experience in journalism, and so I'm going to pick your brain if you don't mind.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk about the issue that's on everyone's mind right now, and that is not only COVID-19, but also China and what has gone on over the past, I guess, since December, really, and the attempts by that communist government to lie, hide numbers, hide information, and basically that steamrolled into what we're seeing right now.
Well, and doctors have disappeared who originally tried to blow the whistle on the coming virus. The University of Southampton in England estimates that if China had not suppressed the information, the original information going back to end of November, beginning of December, that the impact of the COVID-19 virus on the world might have been limited by 95% of what it is today. So there have been in recent days, and you quite correctly described that, as this evidence has accumulated over the last 3 months, since January, in the case of our knowledge here in Canada, it's clear that China, for a variety of reasons, but clearly suppressed information that would have saved many lives in China itself, around the world, and here in Canada. And this is partly the result of the Chinese Communist government's long-standing record of human rights violations, of its intention to mask wrongdoing on a variety of levels, from human rights violations to the internment, the detention camps for the Uyghur Muslim minority in China, from the reprisals against those who display either religious or spiritual independence, like the suppression of the victimization of the Falun Gong, many thousands of victims there in the last 20 years. And in this case, they may have originally thought that they could contain it, but they were criminal in their ability to mislead the world, to mislead Canada, to mislead the World Health Organization, and we are paying for that now. And there are serious voices around the world that at the end of this crisis, we have to focus now on the survival of our populations. But at the end of this crisis, there must be an accounting, and China, I believe, must be held to account. Former Liberal Justice Minister Erwin Kotler, through his Wallenberg Foundation, which I support, has completed a report recommending that Canada eventually join with other democracies and impose Magnitsky sanctions against individuals from the top right down to the lower levels of the Chinese Communist government for suppressing that information, for penalizing and in some cases disappearing whistleblowers.
There's so much there to ask you about, but let's talk about the suppression of information. The Chinese government, from the articles I've seen, knew that human-to-human transmission was a real thing although the information they were giving other organizations and governments around the world was that you could not get it from human to human contact, as I mentioned, which we now know is absolutely false. And this is just the beginning of the information that was suppressed and hidden.
Well, that's right, and they also issued misleading numbers on the number originally infected in Wuhan. The fatalities, those numbers we believe are the numbers that they have released are a fraction. It is believed, and there's abundant evidence from a variety of intelligence sources that the number of infections and the number of deaths is much greater across the board than China has been willing to admit. And as well, they also tried to victimize Taiwan just across the Taiwan Strait by excluding Taiwan from the World Health Organization. And Taiwan, of course, has been one of the leaders in Asia in terms of managing this crisis successfully. And Chinese expertise may well have been a clarion call to the rest of the world within the World Health Organization if China hadn't blocked their participation.
Now, I think a lot of us saw that interview with the Taiwanese reporter asking the World Health Organization representative about China and their involvement and the complete dodging. It was actually more than a dodging. It was a dismissal of that question. Although, as you said, Taiwan has been one of the leaders in terms of getting this virus under control. What does that say to you as a former reporter, but also the connection and the disinformation being spread that led to the situation we're in now by governments all across the world?
Well, this is highly characteristic of China in the past 10 years under President Xi's presidency, suppressing information, propagandizing, in the case of the COVID crisis, making President Xi sound like a hero in terms of leading the fight to contain the virus when exactly the opposite was true. In fact, he was from the top down responsible for the suppression of and continued suppression of evidence. The mismanagement of the attempts to contain information by the Chinese Communist government. We've seen it in Hong Kong. We've seen it in the dispute with Taiwan. We've seen it in trade arrangements with Canada over the past 5 years. The Liberal government, their bilateral diplomatic policy has invited China to treat Canada as a doormat, if you will. And we see the same thing with regards to the trade dispute we've had, and with the highly illegal detention of the two Michaels in China. At some point, China must be held to account. And again, during this crisis, we have to focus on the management of our own protection of citizens. But there must be a time and there must be an accounting of China's obvious responsibility in this. And the WHO's and members of the WHO, their duplicity in turning another cheek when evidence is so obvious and so abundant of China's criminality in this instance.
Yeah, and I think, as you pointed out, it's important to realize that the information coming from China was through the WHO and given to countries, and that's how they framed their response on this in this pandemic.
And even as this has continued, we've seen China admitted to membership in the United Nations Council on Human Rights, which is yet another reason that Canada's voice must join with those calling for reform and renovation of these international bodies, which, like the WHO, have gone so far off the rails.
So who can lead that charge? Would it be the United States? Would it be Canada? Would it be the European Union? How would that come about? I know it's kind of a lot of moving pieces right now, but how do you see that playing out?
Well, in the case of China, which has a veto on the United Nations Security Council, it would have to be the shaming, if you will, this threatening belligerent superpower by a coalition of the democracies. At the moment, from day to day, the United States is not as constant as perhaps our other traditional allies, Germany, France, the United Kingdom, and others, Australia, New Zealand. But at some time in the future, as in the case with Russia and its international misadventures in the Middle East, for example, I think it's going to come down to a minority number of the United Nations, which used to have a majority membership of democracies, but now that's simply not the case. But I think the democracies, when this crisis is said and done, have got to look at new alliances, new joint programs to stand for some of the principles that the UN was originally created on, as NATO was originally created on, and to stand against the superpower, the belligerent superpower bullies like China and Russia.
Well, I think another part that is people are talking about, but I want to mention it here, is along with the health issues going on across the world, personally, I feel bad for the actual Chinese people who have basically been sacrificed by their government through this whole process, basically left to die in many cases.
Absolutely, and that information is being, despite the Chinese government's attempt to interfere and to put a cap on internal domestic discussion of how the crisis was mismanaged and how the Chinese population was in fact tragically victimized. I think that this is becoming a major crisis for the government of Chinese President Xi, and there will be, I think, repercussions in the days ahead. But this regime is very powerful. It has. We remember Tiananmen Square. We remember the brutality that this government can resort to preserve its dominance over the Chinese population. But yes, Canada must feel a great deal of sympathy for the long-suffering population of China, and I've seen it personally for years as the chair of the Parliamentary Friends of Falun Dafa in China, where any individuality is seen as a threat to the Chinese state, and where the Chinese state cracked down without mercy.
Yeah, and I know we only have a few more minutes, so I just want to also touch it. It feels like forever ago we were just watching protests in Hong Kong of ordinary citizens coming together because they want the freedom that a lot of us rightfully enjoy.
Absolutely. And China, again, when Great Britain, when the United Kingdom ceded the colony of Hong Kong to the Chinese government, China signed an agreement promising 50 years of transition, 2 systems, 1 government. They broke that. They began breaking that commitment, that treaty, almost immediately. And they seem intent on absolutely working to impose their mainland Chinese regime on the people of Hong Kong. And this is one of the reasons that I think Canada's voice has been somewhat muted in the past year as the protests have grown in Hong Kong with regards to standing up publicly internationally at international fora, including the United Nations, and condemning the Chinese disregard for that treaty that they signed originally, and for the way that they are interfering in the Hong Kong, what's left of the Hong Kong democratic process. And it's also maybe time, and I've said this, I'm not the foreign affairs critic at the moment, but I think, and I've certainly suggested in my constituency of Thornhill, it might be time for the world to look again at the exclusion of Taiwan from the international community. Taiwan is an example of of how democracy works, and they continue to be victimized in the denial by China, with Chinese officials implanted in a variety of international organizations and agencies. I think Taiwan it's time for Taiwan to be restored in the international community of nations. And it's time to begin thinking about that again after this crisis is passed.
Peter, I have so many more questions for you, but we are running out of time quickly. Do you have any parting words for us?
Well, no, stay safe, stay healthy, stay home. I think, it's an awful lot of very worthy words and encouragements, and more than a few platitudes from some quarters. But we will get through this, and we need to stay strong, and we do need to have a functioning and loyal opposition in Ottawa to challenge the government and to encourage the government to correct some of the mistakes that have been made, and to join with all Canadians in getting out of this together.
Thank you very much, Peter Kent, the Member of Parliament for Thornhill. He's also the Shadow Minister for Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship. I know you're busy, so really appreciate the time.
Thank you very much, Jamie.
So remember, please help us push back against the Liberal agenda. Please like the program, share it, comment, subscribe. Also through the video means, but through audio, CastBox, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play. Help us spread this message. And we'll come back again on Tuesday with another edition of The Blueprint. We'll have some amazing guests to talk about the current situation and ways we can recover from this. So, as always, low taxes, less government, more freedom. That's The Blueprint.